Okay. Good evening and welcome to our fourth and final program in Jewish National Fund's week of celebration of Do BiShvat on campus. My name is Amit Sharir and I am proud to serve as the Jewish National Fund Campus Fellow at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. I am a junior studying biomedical engineering with a specialization in pre-med. I've been active member in Jewish and pro-Israel organizations here on campus. And as an Israeli living in the US, it is important that I raise awareness about the crucial relationships that the US and Israel have, such as this Firefighters Brotherhood. As I plan to attend medical school in Israel, I made it a personal goal to continue nurturing the relationship between the US and Israel while educating others about the importance of this friendship. So before we begin tonight's program, I want to thank the Consulate Generals of Israel of the Pacific Northwest and Southeast, who helped us to secure tonight's panel of speakers and to promote our event nationwide. We're so thankful for our relationship, especially in promoting our Positively Israel message. Also, thank you to everyone who has joined us here tonight, whoever you are, and then helping us highlight Jewish National Fund's work with the environment. Tu B'Shvat is practically a JNF holiday. The JNF has planted more than 250 million trees and has supported many agricultural, water, and environmental initiatives throughout Israel. Though there is no chance for tonight's program for our student network nationwide, no charge, excuse me, I ask for you to please join me tonight in planting a tree in Israel and to celebrate Tu B'Shvat. All you have to do is go to myjnf.org/TBS on campus to donate. Each tree you buy enters you in a raffle to win a chance to win a free trip to Israel. Living in California, have witnessed firsthand the effects of large and dangerous forest fires, but no one has experienced it more fully than the other people who actually fight the fires. Over the years, firefighters in Israel who have helped us here in the US and US firefighters have gone to Israel to help when needed there. Tonight, we will hear from some of the people involved in this partnership and learn about the deep ties and brotherhood that has been formed as they battled in a common enemy. We will hear from two speakers tonight, followed by a Q&A session. So feel free to submit your questions in the chat. All right, so let's dive right into it. Our first speaker is Deputy Consul General Matan Zamir, who represents the Consulate General of Israel to the Pacific Northwest. Matan is from Jerusalem, where his family lived for 9 generations. He trained cadets in the IDF and received a law degree from the Hebrew University before joining the Foreign Service. Deputy Consul Zamir represented Israel in Mumbai and in New England before moving to California to serve. Deputy Consul, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Amit, and thank you, Nelson, and Marnie, and Liam, and Danielle, and Samuel, and Elisa, and the great team at JNF, Oren, and a special thank for me to Chief Epstein that you're going to hear soon. He is a friend, and he's an amazing guy, a real mensch, and he is the star of the evening, so I will keep it briefly. Just to say, thank you for hosting this program. I think it's, Tu B'Shvat is the best occasion to have this type of discussion. So I'll start by saying happy Tu B'Shvat to everyone. And especially, representing Israel at the Israeli Consulate in San Francisco to the Pacific Northwest. One of the things we talk about a lot is, it's basically, we take the credit for the work that you guys do at JNF, is how important the work that Israel is doing in promoting environment, in promoting awareness to climate change. Just as one fun fact, Israel is one of, I think, 2 or 3 countries in the world that has more trees today than Israel had 100 years ago. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. And that's just one example to the amazing work that you do at JNF. And unfortunately, this summer, California experienced unprecedented wildfires, gigafires. There were a lot of different names to it. And when you think about it and you see the statistics, the amount of land that was fired here in California is it's 4.3 million acres, almost equal to the size of the state of Israel. That's how big it was. Israel is 5.1 million acres. So unprecedented, incredible wildfires here in California, and people like Chief Epstein that will speak soon, and a lot of real brave firefighters from Cal Fire, from different local stations, were fighting those fires for months. And we at the consulate contacted the California authorities, Cal Fire and Cal OES, the Governor's Office for Emergency Services, and pretty much asked what we can do to help. I'm sure some of you know that in the past, when Israel experienced crazy fires, not in the same scale, everything in America is on a larger scale, but in 2016, the infamous 1,700 different fires that came from attempts of arsoning and actual arsoning all over Israel, especially around Gaza and up in the north, the United States, and I think Chief Epstein was part of a group of 40 firefighters who came to Israel to help fighting fires in Israel. And in 2010, the Carmel tragedy, where 44 people lost their lives in most of them in this one bus, traveling cadets to evacuate a prison on the Carmel Mountain, caught in that fire and lost their lives. Again, the United States sent firefighters to help Israel fight these fires in Israel. And as I said, when we contacted the California authorities, we asked, what can we do? Because these wildfires were all around us. And then we were told that back then, it was in August, they were okay with equipment, they were okay with supplies, but they would appreciate if we could actually send firefighters from Israel to help fighting those fires in California. And for us, it was a no-brainer, but we were not sure how the Israeli firefighters and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our headquarters will respond to our request. But it was a Wednesday, I think it was August 26th, when we basically said, can you help us send a few firefighters to help this crazy fires that are all over us? And it took 72 hours from the minute that we asked for those firefighters to be sent for them to actually land here. They processed visas rapidly. The Israeli firefighters were able to recruit the right people who had enough experience and enough, professionality and were experienced in different areas of fighting fires, and organize them, including buying tickets, hopping on a plane, flying 16 hours, landing here. It was the 30th of August at 6 a.m., jet lag, but we didn't know that they were jet lag because they were extremely passionate, motivated to just, roll up their sleeves and go fight fire. So that was when we welcomed them at the airport. We were amazed with, how much they're not really tired, even though for the 72 hours before the flight, they were just getting prepared, not really seeing their families. It was in the midst of COVID. August was already, right, a few months after COVID was already everywhere, basically, and no jet lag. And we said, okay, so now it's a Sunday morning. Let's take you to have breakfast. Let's take you just to rest maybe a little bit now in a hotel. Just, you had this long flight. They said, doesn't matter rest, doesn't matter coffee. I mean, they did want coffee, if I'm completely honest. But everywhere else, they said, let's put aside and let's go see those, those forests, and let's go see those fires and what we can do to help. So immediately we could tell that they sent us amazing guys with very high motivation. So then we took them north. They actually did have a day of resting, but very soon after that, they met their friends from Cal Fire. It started as friendship, getting to know each other. And I think it took less than 24 hours for them to in a very real, powerful way to bond and form this very strong brotherhood of firefighters from Israel and from here, from California. And I think you need to have this type of brotherhood when you go for days. They had 24 hours, sometimes even more than 24-hour shifts in the forest in Northern California. It was around a place called Red Bluff. I thought it's not a real place, but it actually is a real place. Around there, there was a lot of fire that was roaming around, and they were here for 2 weeks, for 14 days, 24 hours in, 24 hours out, fighting fires. And two things happened. Other than this extremely strong bond of brotherhood. When the Israelis left, they already talked about how they'll host the Americans, their friends and counterparts back in Israel post-COVID, and how they want to come back here. They were able to really contribute. It wasn't just, oh, we brought 10 firefighters. I mean, they were a drop in the ocean because the magnitude of the fires were huge, but they could really contribute and help. But they also learned a lot because the professionality and the way that the firefighting is happening here in California is really leading the world in technology and in know-how and in innovation. So they were able to share and exchange know-how, but they were also learned a lot. And we were also fortunate to be able, for it was the last day of the actual work. We finished at Matt Epstein, at Chief Epstein Fire Station in Sonoma, where we had a 9/11. It was 9/11 because they left on the 13th. They left on that Sunday, but we had a 9/11 ceremony with the delegation, with Chief Epstein, saluting to the brave first responders who gave their life in New York, and having this Israel-US bond that was extremely, extremely powerful. I'll just conclude by saying that we are looking into expanding this partnership, having and maybe annual, every few months, every year, delegation that will go from here to Israel to learn and to teach, and vice versa. Because I think there's a lot of potential in this partnership, and it can do a lot of good for both countries. So thank you for including me in this incredible event, and happy to BiShvat, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Deputy Counsel. My name is Danielle Kinchiss, and I am a junior at Binghamton University, majoring in psychology with a minor in Judaic studies and health and wellness studies. When I'm not doing schoolwork, I'm the kitchen manager at our Chabad house, play for the women's club basketball team. I'm a research assistant at the Binghamton Gender and Sexuality Lab. And in my capacity here, I am the co-facilitator of the National Initiatives Committee on the National Board for Yavna on Campus, working with fellow students to create innovative programming across campuses. I'm looking forward to being in Israel this summer with Yavna, JLIC, and JNF on the Summer in Jerusalem program. I have the pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Fire Chief Matt Epstein. Chief Epstein started his public safety career in 1997 as a police officer. In 2006, Chief Epstein began his fire service career. Starting as a volunteer firefighter, Matt held many roles in the fire service: prevention officer, fire captain, assistant chief, and the fire chief in 2013. For the last 4 years, Chief Epstein has been serving as the fire chief of Dry Creek Rancheria Fire Department, located in the northern Sonoma County in California. Chief Epstein is also currently serves as a second lieutenant in the California State Guard, commanding the fire response team. He is involved in many nonprofit organizations and serves on many boards of directors. Chief Epstein is a member of the Emergency Volunteers Project, an organization which, in cooperation with the State of Israel, sends American firefighters to Israel in times of major events or emergencies. Chief Epstein has been deployed twice to Israel for fire rescue assignments, once in 2016 and again in 2018. Chief Epstein serves as the vice president of the board of directors of the Jewish Community Center of Sonoma County. He lives in Sonoma County with his wife and 3 children. Chief Epstein, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
No, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. I am so fortunate to have friends with JNF and the Deputy Consul General and the Consulate, and to be able to be part of this event. I love speaking to younger people because, 1, it reminds me I'm no longer young, so I need to stop acting that way. And 2, I like to portray or to put out there my story. You know, when I was asked to talk about this, my experience in Israel, there's no way I can do it without talking about how I got to Israel and why I was there in the first place. And that's a story that starts a lot further back than you might have thought. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to show you some my my presentation. These are there's not a lot to look at. So, but pictures, there's nothing to read. I'm not going to kill you by PowerPoint, but I want to tell you my story of how I found permanent family in Israel, brotherhood, a relationship with not just the Israeli firefighters, but really what I feel the state of Israel, and how I got there. So I was born in New York and I grew up in Northern California, and I had a pretty typical middle-class conservative Jewish upbringing. I went to Jewish day camps every summer. I went to temple, I had a bar mitzvah, and Judaism was a part of our lives. Growing up, I worked in a grocery store, and I was the president of my Jewish youth group, and I balanced the life of being your average, typical California Jewish kid. And I made friends growing up in day camp that I'm still friends with today, and I very much had a strong identity as a Jew growing up. When I turned 18, I started working for the police department, and my relationship with people in general started to change. I started working as a cop in the town I grew up in, which is a unique challenge of its own. And one Friday night, we had an incident with some people. It was a domestic incident, and some of the people involved were members of my synagogue. So when I went to synagogue on Saturday, there was definitely a feel that maybe I hadn't done the right thing. And I'll never forget, this lady came up to me and she said, Matt, good Jewish boys go to law school. They don't become police officers. And it was it was a hard thing for me. And as you start to form an identity as a police officer, you start to lose your identity sometimes as other things. And really at that time of my life is when my Jewish identity started to fade, and my life in public safety and just being an average guy really stuck out. In fact, having the last name that I do, it's easy to assume my background and my heritage. And often when I was talking to suspects, they would ask me, "Oh, are you a Jew?" And it'd be derogatory comments. And it got to the point where the very last thing that I ever wanted to be identified as was the Jewish police officer. I spent almost 8 years as a police officer. I was injured, and while rehabbing, I found a love for the fire service. I got into the fire service and worked my way up to fire chief. I love the fire service. I love the adventure that you get, the brotherhood, the places you go, and the fire service has been very good to me. This year, actually recently, I started working with the California State Guard, and I'm currently the commander of the fire response team, which is a statewide response team. California's had unprecedented fires, and I'll get into that. This is my family. My wife, we've been together 16 years, married 11. We've got 3 children. And I chose these pictures specifically because, yes, that is a Christmas tree in the back. My wife is Catholic. And when we got married, it was very important to my wife that we incorporated some of my background. But I still hadn't really made amends with my background. And we got married in a Catholic church. All 3 of my children are baptized. I don't celebrate holidays. I don't really go to the temple. And so my wife, who is religious, I felt, why rob them of that? And so it's a very diverse household. My daughter, she's the one right here, has always been my little buddy. My boys are my boys, rambunctious. They all are very proud of the work that I do and the work that my wife does. She's a counselor, a school counselor. She deals with kids with emotional and behavioral disabilities. And so I'm very fortunate to have 3 kids now. They're 9, 7, and 3 from parents with different backgrounds, and we tend to make it all work. So let's talk fire. Those of you who watch the news know 2017, we had up here in Sonoma County, the Tubbs Fire, which turned into the Sonoma Complex Fire. When it started, my wife woke me up. She said, "Your pager's going off. I think there's a fire." And I told her, "No, it's fine. Go back to bed. If they really needed me, they'd call." And it turned out once again that she was right. We had fire, wind-driven fire, bringing embers miles from the source of the fire, starting dozens of small little spot fires. And out of a county of just over 500,000 people, we were almost half of that needed to be evacuated. When the fire started, it came hard and fast, and there just were not enough resources to stop it. Whole neighborhoods burned. The city of Santa Rosa ran out of water. We lost fire stations, that's a police car. And for the first week, I was on an engine, nobody slept. And the balance of trying to evacuate people and make decisions about who we could save and help, it was very challenging. The reason I took this picture of this house here is we were actually dispatched to that house as what we call a known rescue. There were people inside, and that's what it looked like when we got there. It was very stressful, and it was very hard. We'd all been to fires, big fires in the state, but it was the first time this was our community that was burning. The very next year, the Mendocino County fire, or the Mendocino Complex fire, was the biggest fire in the state. Once again, hundreds, thousands of acres burning. Homes and people needed to be evacuated, and just not enough people and not enough resources. 2019, we had the Kincaid Fire. Again, wind-driven, embers sparking, and wine country was burning. There's been 3 straight years of fires, businesses that had to close for weeks at a time, firefighters who had been working nonstop, and the exhaustion level was high. This last year, 2020, we had the LNU complex fire, lightning complex fire. I'm going to call it our bad luck, but in the midst of a heat wave, we had random bouts of lightning, and we had small fires all over the county. Once again, having to evacuate almost half the county, and once again, not enough resources, not enough people, not enough equipment. Here's some more pictures. Whole neighborhoods. I took almost all of these pictures, so this is straight dash camera footage here. So, my first trip to Israel was in 2016. When I started working a second job working for the Jewish Community Center of San Francisco as their security and safety director. And when I started that, I still hadn't really reconciled my relationship with Judaism as it applied to me, but I knew that I could do a good job for them, and being the second largest JCC in the country and with my background, I wanted to help, and I thought this is how I could help out. The JCC every year, because of gracious donors, sends a cohort of people to Israel, and I had never been. So in 2016, my boss made me go. He said if I had never been, I needed to go. And so I went, and I was a little bit trepidatious, to be honest with you. Most of the members of my trip were either not Jewish or were Jewish and lived very Jewish lives. I was worried about being judged about my relationship with Judaism. I was worried about how I was going to interact with people. Almost instantly getting off the plane, I felt that familiar. I felt like I was in a place that I should have been. And this picture here is a picture of me sitting at the top of Masada. And I didn't know they were taking this picture, but the thought that I'm having here in this picture was that I love Israel, that it wasn't at all the way that I thought it was going to be. Nobody asked me, how many Saturdays in a row I went to temple. Nobody questioned my Judaism. There was no judgment. Everybody was welcoming and loving. And as I sat there, I thought to myself, what can I do for this place? Because I have found a whole new place, and what can I do to give back? And I think this is an important part of my message is, as Jews, sometimes I feel, especially young Jews, we get pigeonholed into directions that we're supposed to take, or how can we contribute, or what we're supposed to do to contribute. And so when I sat there, I thought, how do I get involved? How do I give back? Well, because I felt like I was in a place where Israel will show you the way. I went to a fire station because here I was wandering around Tel Aviv, and I felt like I wanted to see a fire station. So I went to a fire station. Everybody was really friendly, but they said, hold on, let's find someone that really speaks English. And they found me, my good friend here, his nickname's Grizzly. He was born in New York, FDNY firefighter, decided to move home to Israel, fought in the IDF, and then joined the Israeli Fire Department. So he came and talked to me. 10 minutes into it, he says, do you know about the Emergency Volunteers Project? And I said, no, I don't know what that is. He said, well, the Emergency Volunteers Project is a group that brings American firefighters to Israel when we need help. So I said, where do I sign up? The EVP, it's nonprofit. It is based in Israel, and their whole goal, whoa, why is that doing that so fast? Their whole goal is to bring American firefighters to Israel when they need it. And they do all the time. So when I got home, I told my wife, I said, Megan, you're never gonna guess what I found. And she said, what did you join now? And I said, I joined the Emergency Volunteers Project. I'm gonna go to Israel and fight fire. And she said, when are you gonna have time for that? And my response is, honey, I just joined. What are the odds that I'm gonna have to go anytime soon? So Thanksgiving night, I got a call asking me if I could be in Israel in 24 hours. And I said, of course. So I went. And it was an amazing experience. There were firefighters from LA, from Georgia, from Seattle, and we all went, and we right away got put in the stations. And you know, in America, we call the fire service a brotherhood, but I'll tell you what, if there was a major incident in New York and they sent a bunch of California firefighters to New York to their fire stations and said, hey, we're here to help, I don't know that we would be welcomed as easily and as readily as we were in Israel. The firefighters were so happy to have us. They were so happy to teach us what we needed to know and then ask us to teach them things. So my first city that I was in was up in Petah Tikva. And then I was up in, they moved us up into a city in the Carmel Mountains, and dealing with the arson fires. And as we were up there, our third day, I think, we were told the city manager wanted to meet these American firefighters that were there. So we went to his office and he sat us down, he welcomed us, and he asked, you know, do you know what starts fire? And we're all firefighters, and we're looking at him like maybe we're missing something in translation. And we said, no, we know how to start fire. And then I'm going to read this, it's from my journal from when I was there. He said to us, he said, fire's not always bad. In fact, fire has been more good than bad to people. Fire has provided us light, heat, food, and safety. Fire is good for us. Then he asked us if we knew how to make fire. 4 stunned firefighters looked at the man. The city manager paused and then said, fire is made by banging 2 rocks together violently over and over again until there's a spark, and that spark becomes fire. He continued, maybe that is what Israel is doing. Maybe out of all this violent banging of 2 rocks, we will find the spark that will forever light us, heat us, and provide us with safety. And I was really, really impacted by that. And I was really impacted by the fact that everywhere we went, there was so much love and so much appreciation is almost not enough of a word. And not just for our actions of fighting fire, but just that we would want to be there. This picture of the other American firefighters, I'm the only Jew. These are just firefighters that knew that other firefighters need help and wanted to help. At the end of that trip, we had a big ceremony. We got plaques from the government, and it was just, I was left with an incredible feeling of, I need to do more. I need to get involved more. I need to give back more. So that's when I came home. I got involved with the Jewish Community Center, got on the board of directors, and found myself involved in lots of Jewish activity. In 2018, I went back, this time to the south, down in Beersheba, because of the rocket attacks. And that was new for me too. At the time, I had never served in the military. I'd never been around rockets. And, you know, right away when we landed, the neighborhood started taking. This picture here is of a house we went to the night before that had taken a rocket hit. Again, we were welcomed like family. And, you know, in the firehouse, cooking is everything. Everybody cooks. And so they cooked for us, we cooked for them. But we dealt with a lot of intense things that we don't see here in America. This picture on the right is a picture of one of the kites that we recovered, where they would attach incendiary devices to kites and fly them over. And if you want to put in perspective how big this is, this right here is a grown person's arm. So that's what they were sending over. We had to pull a couple people out of buildings that had been hit by rockets, things that I know were new to me and a little and difficult. But overall, I couldn't have been happier to be back in Israel, be back with my brothers. There was one firefighter in Beersheba that had actually served with me in the north, so it was an old homecoming, and just this feeling that, you know, that I was home. So in 2020, when my dear friend Matan called me and said that the Israelis were coming out, there was no way that we weren't gonna make sure they had a good experience. And when we had this ceremony and talking to the Israeli firefighters, you know, some of which again I had served with, they only had two complaints. One, that there's no good coffee in America, and two, the elevation. They had a little bit of a hard time getting used to the elevation. But when the Cal Fire team and the Israeli team showed up, I didn't see two teams of people. I didn't see Israelis and Americans. I saw a team of firefighters, and they were laughing and joking and hanging on each other, just like we would do. And the desire to exchange information, to teach each other, to stay in touch. And thankfully for Facebook, that's what, you know, we're all in touch. But there was just this this solid feeling of brotherhood. And even my firefighters that had never been over there and didn't know them, this is a great picture. There's some of my team and some of that team. You know, what was important for me was some of my firefighters are young, 18, 19, 20. They couldn't find Israel on a map. And this was the first experience they ever had with Israelis. And they were in the same uniform as them, doing the same job, talking about family, talking about fires they had been on. And when they left, I had questions of, can we join the EVP? Can we go fight in Israel? And just questions, all these questions about Israel and what do they do? How do they do this? What do they do that? What do they call their money? What do they eat over there? And for me, it was really touching in the sense that sometimes, well, all the time, I would say, Israel's not really media coverage of what goes on is not the reality of what goes on over there. Israeli culture is not translated the right way. You know, all we see is all the bad things. And here are men and women that, again, before this couldn't even find Israel on a map, and they're happy to stand with our flag and their brothers and say, we want to go help them. And it was very touching to me. There's Matan, I didn't forget you. I got you in the pictures. But it was a great event. And this picture on the right is extremely important to me too, because these are all brothers from the Shomrim, which is a group of Jewish police officers in America. We have a group, and we're our own brotherhood. So I had the Israeli Fire Department, I had my guys, and I had my Shomrim family all in one place, all together, to celebrate the brotherhood that is America and Israel. And it was very touching. You know, I'll close out because I know there are questions. You know, I'm going to read this in a second. It's from the last page of my journal, but I'll tell you this. My first trip to Israel, we had one afternoon off, and we were able to go to the old city, and I went to the wall, and I sat there, and I thought about my great-great-grandparents and all the generations before me, who every year in some shtetl in Eastern Europe would sit, and they would say to each other, next time in Jerusalem, right? Next year in Jerusalem, right? Knowing that would never happen, but still having the faith and love to say next year in Jerusalem. And here I was, dirty and tired, with Israeli dirt on my boots and under my nails, after being up for days, fighting for that land. And see, I get emotional talking about it. And just wishing that my grandmother had been able to see it. So I'm going to read this last paragraph because I think it's important to kind of the impression the whole experience left on me. This trip was a life-changing event, partly because it came at a time where I'm going through some changes, and this experience helped me make some important decisions. Not many people get to take an impromptu trip and sit at the Western Wall to debate the issues in one's life. I am left reevaluating a lot in my life, my fire career, my relationship with Israel and with Judaism, my personal relationships. What it is that really matters or should matter. One thing I do know is that I'm ever grateful to have been able to spend the last 20 years in public service. I'm grateful to have been afforded the opportunity to help my fellow firefighters and to give back a little to Israel. I'm grateful to have been part of this trip, and I'm even more grateful that in some way, Israel feels like home. So thank you guys for having me. I'm willing to answer any questions that you have about fire or my experience in Israel. But thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Wow, thank you so much. So if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat. We prepared some of our own questions just from our little crew. So if no one else has questions, I have one or two that prepared that I can ask. Okay, so I'll start with one, and if people have any, you'll let us know. So Matt, can you talk a little bit about what the difference is between US and Israeli firefighters, and I guess that relationship and things that you learned from them and they learned from you?
Sure. So there's no wood in Israel. So when you're fighting fire in apartment buildings and homes in Israel, they don't burn the same way. They're a lot hotter. Your survival time inside is a lot less. And so just that's one big difference between just fighting fire in one country or another. I think some of the other thing is that America does everything different. So we tend to fight fire more aggressively and go deeper into buildings than they do in other countries. And so, we have different strategies and tactics when it comes to that. Most European countries, and certainly I would say in Israel, they tend to fight fire from the outside, and there's no good or bad, it's just different. So when I was there, there was a lot more. I mean, they trusted me, but I definitely took them some places they maybe wouldn't have gone before. I think maybe the only other difference is they have to work a lot longer than we do. So there's a lot of older firefighters working that have had real good experience. One of the crises we're seeing in the fire service in America right now is that all our experience is retiring. And so you're dealing with some firefighters there that have worked for 30 years and, back when the equipment wasn't so great, and, they've really got some good experience. So I think those are some of the main differences.
That's really cool. I didn't even know that. I didn't even think about that. The fact that Israel doesn't have wood. Okay, I'm gonna look through this list. I guess Matt and Matan, if you want to jump in here too. What are some other projects that you've worked on that you're proud of?
Matan?
Wow. So thank you for the question. I will use this opportunity to say that even though today is BiShvat, yesterday was the International Holocaust Memorial Day. And for those of you who are interested, this coming Sunday at 10:30 a.m., we will be hosting an event with Yad Vashem. Those of you who are not familiar with Yad Vashem, is the Israeli Holocaust Museum, but it's maybe the most world-renowned research institute for the Holocaust. And it's even because it's a Sunday morning, 10:30 a.m. It's going to be a shorter event, 45 minutes discussing the issue of women in the Holocaust, and we're going to have a professor from Yad Vashem talking about that. So I'm going to use. Even though this is, we're celebrating BiShvat and we're listening to the very, very inspiring Chief Epstein, I think it's a good opportunity to mention that event on a Sunday morning, this coming Sunday morning, and it's going to be also recorded. So if you want to listen to it, go on the Consulate's Facebook page, and the link to the live event is going to be there. There's a lot of other things going on, but I want to ask Matt, what do you guys have else going on?
Well, I think the best way for me to answer the question is that the things I'm most proud of lately are the projects I've been getting involved in with the consulate and with JNF. As I said before, when I was a police officer, the last thing I wanted to be known as was the Jewish police officer. And now I'm damn proud to be known as the Jewish fire chief. And I'm out there because part of the message that I'm trying to show is that we can wear these. This is okay. We can do this, and that we should do what we can. And so that I think is one of the projects. And then while we're plugging things, my involvement with the California State Guard is my newest project. Serving the military, I thought I had gotten too old to do that. And now that I'm involved with that and I'm running this fire team, working with some amazing people, some other Jews in uniform, I'm really enjoying that. And so that's my newest project. But I can't be thankful enough for my relationship with the consulate and with JNF.
Amazing. You got a question in the chat, Matt. It's how has your perspective on fighting fires changed since you spent time in Israel? Which I thought was a great question.
Well, okay. So I'm a fire chief, so I don't really do the water on the fire anymore stuff, right? So, but when I go to Israel, I actually am, because it's a different environment. So what it really taught me was you can't let your skills get soft, right? Because you never know where you're going to show up, and that you got to keep training and keep ahead of the curve. So I think that's probably was the biggest takeaway from there, was that maybe I'd gotten a little fat, maybe a little slow, and that I needed to step it up a little bit and work on my skills.
Thank you. We have another question from the chat. This one is from Ben. How do you handle anti-Semitism or misinformation about Israel from your fellow firefighters?
Good question. So the anti-Semitism I haven't really had to run into. It actually only happened one time where somebody used a derogatory comment in talking with Jews, and they didn't even know I was a Jewish person, which actually really opened my eyes to the difference between being a minority that blends in and a minority that does not, and how important it is for those of us that do blend in that we don't allow us to, and that we recognize that other people can't. So I think that was, for me, a very big experience of, I can hide and let those things go, but then we do nothing to help the people that can't hide, and shouldn't have to hide is a whole other thing. But as far as misinformation about Israel, I got to tell you, my fire station of 30 firefighters are probably the most informed firefighters about Israel. We have a plaque in our day room. And so I'm proud of that. And so how I handle, because look, when we talked afterwards, there was a lot of misinformation, from grand political misunderstandings to just little simple cultural ones. And so it was good to have the conversation, but it was all done in an open way of wanting to learn. And I think that's the difference between never meeting an Israeli and just meeting one and making a new friend that all of a sudden you care about, that you see a mirror image of yourself, and then wanting to know more about them. And so that's why these programs are so important.
Amazing, thank you. Another question that I personally had was, what was an important lesson that you learned from firefighting, and how do you apply it to your life if you decide to make it a practical lesson?
Oh, geez, there's so many to learn from public service in general. Some of it sounds really corny, but I tell my new firefighters when they start that this badge is a symbol of the public trust, the trust that the public has in us to do the right thing for the right reasons. And there's not enough of that in the world. Too many people have to work real jobs, and where the doing things for the right reason doesn't help your bottom line, right? So I think one of the things I learned is I cherish the fact that I get to do the right thing for the right reason. Unfortunately, you learn that life is precious, and that's the other thing, and how fortunate you are to have your loved ones, to have people be safe, and not have bad things happen to them. And I think one of the other things that I learned, one of the most important things is whatever it is, you got to have a code. You got to have, and if it's religion, that's great. If it's something else, you got to have a code. And, for me, I still, and I'm not kidding, every day where I have methodology of how I put this all together, right? The name tag goes first, then the collar brass. It's all very specific. And it's a ritual of thanks, because I started when I was 18 and I didn't know anything about anything. And now I have a whole life full of adventure. My kids have a house and dogs, and I have friends because of public safety. And so there's a bit of thankfulness that's in there too.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Especially about firefighting, about lessons that you've learned. Are there any moments or memories that particularly stick out to you over your long career? And how do you deal with sometimes negative memories about certain fires and some positive memories as well?
Well, there is mental health and public safety is a thing. It's a real thing. And, it's like you talk about the firestorm at 17 here. It was so hard to go out after that because people knew we were firefighters and they wanted to give us hugs and say, thank you for saving my house or thank you for this. All we thought about were the ones we couldn't save. So it is hard sometimes, but, I think of the positive things. I did my first year as a police officer. I was like just 20. I delivered a baby, and that was, scary, but it was a good time. You celebrate the wins when you can. People that you brought back, and you were able to save, and even sometimes the ones that you can't. Sometimes you're the one holding their hand as they go, and so as much as that's not great. To be able to do that and give the compassion to somebody and make them feel like somebody is with them is turning a negative into a positive. So, and let's be real, we have a lot of fun. That's the other thing. Like we have a lot of fun. We're a family. We're goofballs. There's this. I heard this thing one time that you automatically stop aging the minute you get into public safety, right? Mentally, like behaviorally. So we're all a bunch of kids. We do things together, we have fun, and it's been a great family for me. So I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways.
Very nice. Just about the fun side of being a firefighter, what are some things that you do at your fire station to either pass the time between calls, or do you guys play baseball around the station?
Well,
or
7 to 5, the guys are working. They're training, they're cleaning tools. We have this saying in the fire service that if you're not cleaning, you're training, and if you're not training, you're cleaning, right? And so they work hard all day long, and on different projects and things. And that's why I work 7 to 5, because that's their work hours. And then I go home, and then we call it shorts 30. They put on their shorts, they watch TV, they barbecue, they goof off, and try to relax before the next thing. But we try to have fun with each other, even in training. It's a good environment. Most days it's more like being at work with a bunch of your brothers and sisters and cousins. It's not like being at work most days.
Okay, I guess I'll ask the next question to both of you. How has your job changed, or has it changed since COVID, and how has that been for you?
Matt, please.
I'll go first. So it's challenging, right? I mean, for everybody. Interpersonal, right? I come home from work and my wife has been at home all day with the kids and doing her work, and it's stressful for her because I got to leave the house, right, and she didn't. Dealing with how we've had to change policy, how we've had to treat things differently. It's all been challenging. This month, one of my guys worked in a hospital for 14 days to try to help out. The state sent him, and so it's been challenging. I think for me, it's a very different type of challenging. I'm over Zoom meetings. It seems like I have more meetings because people feel like because it's Zoom, that's okay. Some of those tasks have become, kind of hard. But I think the hardest thing to watch is, like all of us, businesses closing, people not being, we go to calls for older people, elderly people who haven't left the house, and we're the first people they've seen in months. Those things are hard and challenging. Mostly just watching the suffering that people are going through economically, physically. That's the hardest.
And before I answer that, I want to answer Sam's question. So we actually play football at the Consulate every once in a while. We're Israeli, so not very well, but we try. No, but
American football or Israeli football?
I don't know what American football is even. There's one football. We don't play American football with your foot, so I don't know what you're talking about. No, but to answer your question, Danielle, I agree with everything that Chief Epstein said. This is definitely a difficult time for everybody. We are fortunate to be able to work at a place like the Consulate that is essential. So we do get to go in capsules to the office, alternate days, and serve the public. The consular section is open, so for people who need emergency passport, emergency traveling, visas, they can come to the consulate. But our, what we call public diplomacy, our political work, academic, cultural, business work is all online. And for diplomats, a lot of our work is meetings, is in person. We build relationships, and it's much more difficult to do it via Zoom or online or over the phone. But we try to do our best. The only lemonade out of this huge lemon is that we can do events and have a stronger, let's say, or better outreach. For example, last week we had an event showcasing art from San Francisco and from Haifa. Amit can tell you more about that because his sister who works at the consulate organized it, and she did a fantastic job, basically allowing people, and we had 600 people from all over the world, from Israel, from the United States, from Europe, touring a museum exhibit here in San Francisco and a couple of museums in Haifa, having a tour guide through the Zoom. And that's something that we can do in these difficult times. So that's what we're trying to do, a lot of online activities, and try to make the best out of it.
A question for everyone here, for Fire Chief Matt Epstein and Deputy Consul Matan Zamir. Besides for Corona and the family life, how does it feel to come home from sometimes high stress jobs at a fire scene or possible political high tense situations? How do you balance that with your jobs and with your family? And how would you feel if your children would follow your footsteps and enter either for Chief Epstein, the fire department, or for Deputy Consul Matan Zamir, enter into the diplomatic world?
So I've got 3 kids, 9, 7, and 3. My oldest is my daughter, and she was the one in the picture that I showed there. She's always kind of she's been coming to fire stations with me since she could walk. So when I come home, first thing she says to me is, "Did you get a job today?" And I gotta tell her all about it. Then she wants to question the tactics that we took. Then she wants to give her input. So, when you say, how would I feel about, how do we deal with it? We're a fire family. I mean, that's just the reality, Both my brother-in-laws are deputy sheriffs. My wife's uncle was CHP. My wife's cousin CHP. It's kind of in the family. So, I do worry about them wanting to get into this job, just because, as a parent, the last thing you want them to do is anything dangerous. But, at the same time, my 9-year-old thinks she's going to be a firefighter. My 7-year-old thinks he's going to be a firefighter. And so I enjoy that because they like me now, and then they won't when they're teenagers. And so I just try to enjoy it. And the one thing I do tell them, all joking aside, is a piece of advice my father gave me. My dad told me when I was growing up, whatever you do in life, be a garbage man. Just be the best garbage man, right? And do things and contribute. And so that's what I tell them. And so if they grow up and they decide they want to be in the fire service, then that's what they'll do. If they grow up and they decide they want to be a baker or whatever, as long as they're contributing and they're doing. And I think that's also a really important message to kind of tie back to my story and why I shared it with you the way I did. I'm lucky that I'm able to contribute to Israel and to by doing that with what I do, right? I'm a firefighter. I get to go fight fire. I think that everybody has a way to contribute to Israel and to help with Israel with their own skills and their own abilities. And so people should never feel like because they're not, in these little buckets that they can't give back, because there's people there that want, any type of interaction that you can give, people will be looking to help. There's organizations to join. There's ways to help with whatever skill set you have. And so I just think that's the most important thing. And I tell them.
And all I can add is that I absolutely agree with everything you said. There's nothing, there's nothing I can add. That it's just, I'm signing off on your answer.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you both for joining us today and for answering all these great questions. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. And a bit introduction about myself. I'm Sam Clark, and I'm proud to serve as the Yavne Fellow at the University of Florida. I'm a first-year political science major, and I plan to double major in criminology and ultimately join public service, possibly in prosecution in the future. I'm passionate about Israel and Judaism and actively work to create Jewish events on and across campuses. I'm excited to partner with the Jewish National Fund, especially for this firefighting panel, as my grandfather and uncle both served as firefighters in Massachusetts. So I spent a lot of time hanging around the fire station over there. And I always loved hanging around and seeing the guys and maybe even turning on a couple of the lights on the trucks. So thank you again for attending this amazing program and learning more about the brotherhood between Israeli and American firefighters. And I'd like to remind everyone to visit myjnf.org/TBS on campus to honor our forest and firefighters and purchase a tree certificate. And just a quick update about our fundraiser. We've got great news. We have had a great success this year. We're up to 99 fundraisers. Our goal is 115 fundraisers. We've raised $2,600. Our goal is now $2,700. And I'd like to share a little bit more of some exciting JNF opportunities. Alternative winter break and alternative summer break is an opportunity to visit your trees in Israel as you travel and volunteer in this summer for free with the Jewish National Fund. Many fantastic college students will be going, and I hope you'll join us. More details and information can be found at jnf.org/break. And calling all budding architects, landscapes, designers, artists, and sculptors from all over the world. Submit your ideas for the Envision Tomorrow's Israel competition. JNF USA is building a world-class campus in Beersheba. I'll revolutionize Zionist and Jewish educational engagement for the decades ahead. We're looking for unique design concepts for key elements of this village, including dorms, high school classrooms, conference center space, cafes, houses of worship, outdoor gardens, entrances, donor wall, and more. Enter today for a chance to win up to $8,600 at jnf.org/village. This concludes our week of programming hosted by the Jewish National Fund on campus. Thank you for joining us and helping us to focus on Israel, trees, and our planet. Thank you, good night, and Chag Tu B'Shvat Sameach.